Welcome back to part 2 of solving equations using inverse operations. We're going to do a few more examples together to make sure you really understand the process of solving equations this way. So the first equation we're looking at is 2x minus 6 equals 4. If you remember from the last video, I'm trying to figure out what number could substitute in for x that would make 2x minus 6 balance with 4. Maybe you can figure this one out in your head, but I'd like for you to practice going through the steps to figure it out. So, to do so, we first ask ourselves what operations are happening to x. And the operations I see are multiplying by 2 and subtracting 6. In the last video, we talked about how we'll use the inverse operations to undo those. So the inverse of multiplying by 2 is dividing by 2. And the inverse of subtracting 6 is adding 6. So in my problem to solve, I will do those two things. But I need to think about the order I'm going to do them in. So I'm going to think about SADMIT, which tells me it's my inverse order of operations, but it tells me that the first thing I do is any adding and subtracting, and then after that I do any multiplying and dividing. So looking through, I have divide by 2 and add 6. Adding 6 will be first, and dividing by 2 will be second. Once I've created my plan, I can go over to my equation to get ready to solve. So I like to draw a line down from my equal sign because it shows the two sides of my equation. I know that whatever I do to one side of the equation, I also have to do to the other. So in my first step, which is add 6, I need to add 6 on both sides of the line. I want to make sure I line up my like terms. So 6 and 4 are like terms, they're both constants, and minus 6 and plus 6 are the like terms here. When I add them together, on this side 4 plus 6 is 10. But over here on the left-hand side, the subtracting 6 and the adding 6 cancel to make 0. So I'm only left with 2x left on this side. Once I've done something to my equation, I always write what my equation looks like now. That's my first step complete. The next thing I said I would do is divide both sides by 2. So I'm going to take my 2, and I like to divide using a fraction line, another way to write division. And I'll write my new equation after I've divided both sides by 2. So 2x divided by 2 cancels and just leaves me with x. The dividing by 2 undoes the multiplying by 2. And on the other side, I have 10 divided by 2, which is 5. So using my solving technique, using my inverse operations, I got that 5 should be the value of x that balances my equation. I'm always going to check that because I can make mistakes and I want to make sure I'm getting it right. So I take my equation, but I substitute 5 in for x. So 2 times now 5 minus 6 should equal 4. Then I do my operations out. 2 times 5 is 10, minus 6, is that 4? Yes, it is. So my answer is correct. 5 is the value that balances. So my answer, x equals 5, is right. On to another question that has different operations in it. So in number 3, I'm going to look at my equation and I see y over 6 minus 1 equals 2. So I go through and I figure out what's happening to x, what operations are happening to my variable. And in this case, y is getting divided by 6. And then we're going to subtract 1 away from that result. So I'm going to undo it. How do I undo division? That's with multiplication. How do I undo subtraction? That's with addition. So the two things I'll do to solve this problem are multiplying by 6 and adding 1. Checking up on my SADMAP order, the addition needs to be done before the multiplication. So this is my first step, this is my second step. When the plan's ready, I can now apply it to my problem. Just like in that last example, I show the two sides of my balance. And I pick my first operation, adding 1 to both sides. And so I line it up. I add 1 on both sides of my line here. 2 and 1 make 3. And on the left-hand side of my equation, the -1 and the +1 cancel each other out. So I'm only left with y over 6. After I've done something to my equation, I always rewrite that equation to show what is on the balance now. So now I just have y over 6 on one side and 3 on the other side. Once that step is complete, I can move on to step 2, which is multiplying both sides of the equation by 6. So to show multiplying, I'll just show it like that. Multiply by 6 on both sides. Over here on the right, I'm left with 18, 6 times 3. And here on the left, I can check out my fractions here. 6 goes into 6 one time, so that simplifies all the way down, and it's just going to leave me with 1y, which is what I was looking for. So the value of my variable, I think, is 18. That's what my steps gave me. But to be sure, I'm going to go back and check in my original equation. So to check, I take my equation as it was, at the very beginning, but instead of my variable, I now put in the number I think it's worth. So I think my variable is worth 18. I'm going to check that out. Well, if I take 18 and divide it by 6, that's 3, and if I subtract 1, I do get 2. So it checks out. That's my answer. Try the next two problems on your own, and I'm going to make a video that just shows the answers at the end. So you can come in and check in with that and see how you did.